Welcome, everybody. My name is Arjun Roy, producer, recordist, and mix engineer, currently sitting here in beautiful Grande Prairie, Alberta, which is my hometown. So first of all, thanks for checking this video out. Make sure to hit subscribe and smash that little bell if you haven't yet. So this is the first episode of a series of podcasts that I'm calling the Hometown Hustle podcast. It's really an unedited conversation between myself and some of my dear friends in music and art who were instrumental in the overall music and artistic scene here in Grande Prairie and the region. This specifically is about my artistic journey and the scene that helped me get where I am today. So the first person that I am going to chat with is my dear friend, Brandon Mann. Brandon, welcome.
Thanks.
How you
for
doing?
having me. Yeah.
Of course. No, man. When this whole so full disclosure, I'm not the only person to have had this idea about podcasting about this kind of thing, and that's good because I feel like there are a lot of people who played a lot of interesting and fundamental roles in what went down, in GP and I don't know. And for me, it was 2000 onwards, which is, did we meet in 2000 or 2001?
It would have been around there, yeah. So,
yeah.
Well, 2000. Yeah, it would have been more 2001-ish. We might have met in 2000, but it was briefly.
Yeah, I gotcha. Because I got here and I think I went into computer science and then I switched into music.
Yeah.
So I think maybe my first year here was all sort of comp sci kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it ended up being, and then it slowly started shifting towards the musical end of things. So we probably, I think we started chatting and hanging out in 2001.
Yeah, so how I recall it is that at some point in time you were down in the cafeteria with your trademark Slammer Explorer, right?
Yes.
And you were in the cafeteria portion, not in Howlers, and just noodling on it, and then people were chatting to you. I think I might have been with Mike Dyer at the time.
Oh, yeah, Mike Dyer.
We stopped and said hi to you and stuff like that, and I was like, cool guitar, man, right? Little did I know it was a Slammer.
Yes.
And
so just a quick, if I may interject. So my main instrument for a long time, especially while on tour and playing in bands, was a Red Explorer, and then two Red Explorers. People assume that it's like a Gibson Explorer or something like that, but it's not. It's not only it's not only a Hamer Explorer, but it's not even actually a full Hamer. It's like the Slammer series, which was Hamer's, entry level, $200 range discount kind of thing. But you know what?
It's like a Squire.
Yeah, it's like a Squire, absolutely.
Of Explorers.
That's still my number one, my number one drop C metal machine. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So, anyways, that's when I first met you, I guess. And then, how it went was that we ran into each other after Pantera, I think, in Edmonton, and then after Ozzy.
That's right. That's right. Because we ended up, and those sort of the same. They were the same year. Pantera was the end of the summer, and Ozzy was in the fall.
I could check
in Edmonton.
it
was something like that, right?
I don't know. I think it might have been the next 2 years actually, because I think we didn't. It was probably 2000, so it would have been 2001 was Pantera, and then March of 2002 would have been Ozzy.
Okay, that makes sense.
That. Yep. And then 2002 September, I don't know. I think then I came back to school, and then at that point in time, I'd bought a Les Paul, and then was big into Zakk Wylde and all that stuff, right? And that's kind of when we ran into each other again in Howlers, and I'm like, hey, you're that guy that's in all I see it in the LRT station at the concerts. And,
after all the concerts.
Yeah, because we're like, oh man, you're from Grande Prairie, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So there are two things that are interesting right there. One is, of course, we keep talking about Howlers, which for anybody, I'm assuming a lot of people who may not know what that is. Howlers Lounge is the lounge in Grande Prairie Regional College, also known as GPRC. And so, the early 2000s, there were a bunch of us who went to college, who either finished, who either did a couple of years and then transferred, or like myself, did, a couple of years and then dropped out and pursued music in some way. And so Brandon and I would run into each other there. And then a common thing, geographically speaking, Grande Prairie doesn't really get or at that point, got no sort of major shows. We would have some concerts at like the Corral, right?
Yeah.
The Corral, it was still the Corral at the time. That was a big bar. But most of the shows would happen in Edmonton or Calgary or Vancouver. So, I mean, again, geographically speaking, we would drive like 5 hours to get down to Edmonton and back, maybe the same day, or like 8 or 9 hours to Calgary and back. And so when we did, you would always see like a contingent of Grande Prairie folks, like familiar faces, leave, like either going to the concert or leaving on the LRT. So you just be like a train packed full of, concert goers, and you just see like somebody on the far end of the train who you'd recognize. And so we saw each other multiple times at shows that we both dug at the time. And then 2002 September Howlers.
Yeah, I think
we started chatting and hanging out some more.
I think you were also jamming with Eric. Right,
Walsh. Eric Walsh.
Yeah.
Eric Walsh.
Which I knew Eric from Fairview,
and
right?
Jeremy as well, right?
Jeremy, I knew from Fairview.
That's right.
So you were jamming with them guys, and so there was some connection there too. But like I think that I just it was a long time ago, but I think we just started chatting about gear, Zach Wild, and stuff like that.
EMG pickups.
Probably. Yeah.
That's right.
And putting them into Les Falls.
Exactly. And at the time we were, what was going on in Zach and Aussie land at the time? They were touring, but
that
was like
was pretty huge.
That's right.
Yeah, it was like the really when Black Label started really when they took their separate directions more than anything.
Exactly.
But anyways, it's not really about that. It's like it's just that I was more definitely into like I knew a lot about gear, not a lot about playing at that time. So but it definitely gave us something to talk about. But you were playing with Eric and them guys. I remember, and that was kind of that start. But I'd like to take like an aside just to talk about before that happened, right? Yeah. Just the GP music scene and what was before, because I remember the before, right?
Exactly.
The couple things, right? So
real quick, what is this sort of like pre-year 2000 or like pre-2002 that you remember?
It's about 2000, around that 2000. It was the year 2000, right?
Perfect. So I got to Grande Prairie in 2000, and I wasn't super into the music scene at the time. I'd seen some bands, but for people from the area, there were there was already a stable of musicians, a bunch of venues and things like that people would gig at. So Brandon will tell us a little bit about that.
So the couple things I remember is that I remember seeing the first thing I seen after I got to Grande Prairie was it would have been. I can't even remember what they called themselves, but maybe one of you guys can help me out here. But it was Kaylee and Justin's thing, hey?
The Bella Bella.
Bella Bella, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And
Bella
I seen them. It was me and that guy Mike Dyer there. That I graduated with Mike, right? But we went to this it's where it was like this kind of Italian restaurant in
Albano's.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's not that I remember that right now, but I made a note of that because when I first moved to town, I remember hearing a radio ad that said, featuring Bella Bella at Albano's this weekend. I didn't know what any of that meant.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I was there. I watched them play or whatever, not knowing, know who those people were later on or anything like that. But it was like the first kind of thing that I seen in Grande Prairie. So that was kind of interesting. And then I remember, which later on it makes more like it. It definitely was a huge part of the GP music scene, which is like Mac Hasselfield and company, right?
Exactly.
However, I remember Mac from like Spirit River, right? So,
right. Okay.
Because him and his band played the Spirit River like grad thing, right? And the two guys that were in his band, like they went to GPRC or whatever, and those two guys were I can't remember what band they did after Mac, because Mac went with a certain something and they were doing their own thing. But I hung around with those guys quite a bit at that time before meeting you.
Yep.
But what were their names? Ryan, I think, maybe. And anyways, that's where Max kind of comes into play, though, right? Was his, like, he played with this band in Spirit River and before all that stuff came to be, right? So I remember seeing them at the grad there in 2000, right? So
how would you describe the music of that band? Was it similar to a certain something?
No,
it wasn't. Okay,
it was like more rock. Like those the other two guys, who was the bass player and the guitar player, they were more rock. Like it was more rock and more metal styled, right?
Okay.
I think they did covers of, I don't know, Rage Against the Machine or something like that. I can't remember.
Was so one of the first bands I saw when I moved to town was I think it was at Howlers at GPRC, was Pillbox. Do you remember those guys? I think that was like a Stacey Brown was singing for those guys briefly, and they covered some Tool, they played some Rage Against the Machine, and they played some original music that sounded like Tool as well. And that was
rings a bell.
Okay. Again,
that name rings a bell. Pillbox.
Pillbox, a certain something, and later we'll talk about the lore surrounding Crushing Sarah and other.
I don't know.
Oh, you will. Okay, so Bella Albanos.
The other thing is there was a band, Ken Orr's band. What was that one called?
Oh,
yeah.
Man, I don't remember.
Ken, these two guys might have.
Sean.
Right.
And Henry, was Henry playing with them? It was like those three guys, right?
Those three guys. And then there was somebody else, I think, in it. But what was it called? Shoot. Anyways, I liked that band. That was like
they had a really cool sound.
Yeah, it was a very COC kind of like corrosion conformity, like that. I don't know. That was around that same era, that before the 2002 kind of happened. Like that was around that era of time. So it was before. And I probably seen them at Howlers or something like that during that time. So
I remember seeing those guys at Howlers. Again, I blank on the name.
Maybe it was 2002.
Yeah.
So because you were playing Howlers at 2002, but it was kind of you just did metal covers and stuff like that, right? So, for the most part.
Exactly. Metal covers. I feel like I jammed with random people. There was one
Eric would have like an electronic drum kit on the stage all the time.
Exactly. And sometimes only myself and Eric would play. It was amazing. It was, again, I think
I might have witnessed that, which was
I think in the overarching sort of
sad, probably.
Story of this podcast. That's like, I guess all that gets followed under the fundamental, the foundational time, which was cool because, I mean, I don't know about you, but at the time, like I wasn't thinking about playing music, about performing or being in the music biz or anything like that. Like, I just dropped out of pre-med and I was going into comp sci, and I feel like I thought that's probably what I was going to do. But seeing a lot of these bands and meeting a lot of these people it was really inspiring, just because I feel like, at least from my recollection, there were like a ton of bands, when I got there, when I was cognizant of sort of the scene. So aside from Albanos, did you, I'm trying to remember the name of this place, like the Compass or the Sea Spot? Did you ever go there?
I didn't go there. No? That predated me, for sure. I don't even think it was, in 2000, like it was, I don't know if it lasted, like it wasn't open in 2002, I don't think. It was already done.
Got it.
But I'd heard about it, and definitely through like Vince later on, I heard a lot about the music scene that surrounded that, which was completely different. But
definitely,
the other thing I can tell you, like another just a memory about with you when you were jamming with those Eric Walsh and Jeremy McCracken, is that I remember they lived in the house that was across the street from like the Chinese food place, right? On 100th Ave. But anyways, it was a very, very old house.
It was rickety.
I just remember the basement having such foundation problems that you guys were playing on wood pallets that had like carpet over them.
Yeah.
And because like underneath it was water, right? Like it would flood.
Yeah. I think if we unpack everything that happened, so we're talking about like a rickety old house with cracks in the foundations, and we're playing in the basement. with all of our, I mean, and they had like computers set up for all the stuff that they did artistically.
Yeah.
We had all of our amps set up, and then there were pallets to level out the floor or something, or provide us like a floor to play on.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'd forgotten about those specifics. Pallets with carpeting over the top. We would jam. I think JD
Sketchy.
Belanger was vocalist for one of those things. Later,
Yeah,
I
it
don't
was
know
like Johnny Thunder and the Talking Plasma Band. I think
exactly.
we just seen that, yeah,
Which,
or something
and
like that.
I don't know why we were called that. Maybe we used that name like 3 times. Like I don't remember much.
I don't know if you played any originals anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
We
does
didn't.
it?
No. That, which is actually an interesting point, because I remember at the time we played covers, we played heavy music, and that was, I think, what drew us all together. And then we were trying to write originals, and they were older than me, and they'd been in bands before, and so I don't know. I don't know if all of us knew how to write together necessarily, and so my, that configuration of people kind of fell apart soon afterwards. And I mean, they continued to do a bunch of other music, but not with me. Okay, so going back, so you recall Albanos and that scene. Did you meet Kaylee and Justin at the time? Like, did you chat with any of those guys?
No.
Okay,
They were good.
they were
Yeah,
good.
they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
Kaylee's like, again, so Kaylee Cardinal is like an award-winning, one of the premier singers in Alberta and much of Canada, I would say. And yeah, that was one of her early bands here in Grande Prairie, which was which was really good. I mean, she was already one of just an incredible singer at the time, a very compelling artist. And then, okay, so who else? Do you remember Nathaniel and Elijah's Tomb?
Not until later, for sure.
Okay,
I didn't
gotcha.
remember him around that era.
Yep.
So like, let's see. So with 2002, after that, like then it really then, for like I remember a time that I don't know when this was exactly after that. It would have been probably. It might have been into 2003 at this time, right? Because it was there was a jam set up, right?
Okay.
With you, Kata Lansgard, Neil Farnquist, Vince, I think, was there, and Vince Marple and myself, and it was in the black box of the college.
That's right. I forgot about
And
that.
it is, we brought our gear down there, right?
Yep.
Which I just brought like a little tiny Bandit, and anyways, I was way out of my league, that's for sure. But you guys, that's kind of the first kind of starting of like No One's Alone, actually, I think, right?
That led to that. Exactly. So I think I must have met Neil maybe the end of the first year in town, which would have been early 2001. Because I was renting a room in a house, and Neil was a friend of somebody from one of my classes, and they said, "Oh, you play guitar? I know one other person who plays guitar," and it was Neil.
Yeah.
And so Neil and I just started playing, and Neil is into a certain kind of music. I would say he's into a lot of classic rock as well as a lot of other stuff. But that was where we connected, and so we started jamming just for fun. Playing 12-bar blues, playing a bunch of covers. Yeah. And then that at some point led to this black box jam.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure when I would have met Cadel, but it would have been at the college because he was there for a bit.
Yeah. And he was playing with some other band.
Yep. Exactly.
And then Vince was just around.
Vince was around. Yep.
He was like a fixture almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I mean, I didn't know Vince before then, but I feel like he would show up at some of the open mics that were happening in town at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So question, taking it way back. Music, aside from, being a good friend and like a great guy to chat about gear with, you're a musician as well. You play, you have a great, almost an encyclopedic memory in terms of gear and liner notes and that kind of thing. When you were young, what drew you to music? Like, what's an early musical memory that you have? It doesn't have to be like, the first, but what's, when you were a kid, what was a musical thing that you remember?
That's a good question. Like it's an impossibly hard question, but I don't know. I think that, let's see. I don't know. I just always remember listening to tapes and stuff like that.
Okay.
Like back in the day when before CDs and stuff, and really like I don't know it. Some things stuck with you, and I was like that and stuff. I don't know, and I think that when you listen to heavy music, whatever you I don't know. Eventually, you want to try to play some of it. I guess
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
It's so I guess that's why I got a guitar in the first place. I guess like I got it way later on. I didn't really get any. I wasn't in music or anything like that in school or anything. But
Gotcha.
I don't know. Yeah, it just I was into the heavy metal and stuff like that, and yeah, it certainly. I just remember like that was a bunch of my friendships were based around like music and metal and stuff like that in high school, and I don't know. It was fun to drive around listening to freaking tunes and whatnot.
Of course. Well, and I understand. Like when I first moved to Canada when I was younger, I was in high school in Hay River, Northwest Territories. And it was like a super small town. And what we did for fun a lot of time was exactly that. You just went cruising. Like everybody just kind of cruises around in the evening, listening to tunes. You run into some friends. I don't know, grab some snacks and then cruise around some more.
Yeah.
Did you know anybody who played instruments at the time? Like, did anybody in your family or friends?
A friend of mine, Ryan, he had a good acoustic guitar and I think a crappy Fender Strat or a clone or something like that, or like a Squire, I don't know. Anyways, I just remember him showing me how to like play the start of like Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, which is like simplest thing to play. However, it's like it's the simplest thing to play. It's like the other part though.
Yeah, of course.
Good luck,
course.
right? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's not that's it gets very not simple very quickly.
Yeah.
But no, I remember doing that and playing around with the guitar on that. That's probably the first time I played around on a guitar. So that's kind of a catalyst to that, right?
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
And then after moving to Grande Prairie, did you, when did you buy your first guitar?
Oh, it was before I lived in Fairview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was from like my gas station money or whatever. I like went and bought a PV Predator, I think it was.
No way.
Yeah.
I had one of those as my first guitar as well.
Yeah. And then it was a piece of crap. And like the strap, like seriously, like this is how bad this guitar was made. Like brand new right off the shelf. And like the strap button like fell out of it.
Right.
I don't even know how that happened. Anyways, so I took it back and I'm like, it was up to a Epiphone or this Godin, red Godin, and Dave Wright at GP Music at the time, like convinced me to go the Godin route, which I like that guitar now, but at the time it was like a Les Paul with a Strat neck kind of, and I got bugged for having that guitar.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, the SG would have been the right choice. It was a cooler looking guitar, that's for sure.
I got you.
Because the Godin, the thing is, it's cool because it's original, but when you're starting out with the guitar, I don't know, you should just go with the coolest looking thing, probably. Honestly.
Oh, sure. I mean, at that time in one's life or artistic development or whatever, it's like maybe it's just a hobby or something, but it's definitely one of those things where you have conversations with friends or people at the music store, and everyone kind of scrutinizes what it is that you have and what you do. And
then I traded that Godin because of all that stuff, right? For a LTD that got dropped off the shelf. Another guy that was in the GP music scene that actually the story goes he knocked off the shelf, but maybe I won't name names here. But
sure, somebody knocked a thing off the shelf.
Anyways, who was also a prominent member of the GP music scene at the time.
Okay.
Anyways, it had like this huge ding in it, so I got a discount, but it's just like a LTD ESP like
that thing,
cheap version, and had Floyd Rose on it and stuff like that. Nice. So I went with that one, and then Floyd Rose is extremely difficult off the start, by the way, like
of course.
Tuning, setup, etc. And then I bought a Les Paul after working a bunch. after I stopped school and then I went worked for a while and I had some extra cash, so I bought a Les Paul, used one, and I think I had a Bandit at the time maybe, and some pedals. So
cool.
No half stacks or anything like that.
Of course, I know.
Half stacks came later.
That came later, exactly.
But that's how I got my first Les Paul, which I did get EMGs and I did put them in there.
Right. So looping back to EMGs, this brings us back to again. I think Zach Wilde.
Yeah.
And I was in a similar place around that time where, for whatever reason, I was huge into Zach's playing. His tone and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I feel like the first real professional piece of gear that I bought was the older JCM 800 head that I owned, and that was purely because of Zach and wanting that kind of heavy, aggressive rock sound that wasn't overly metallic. Although later that's what I wanted.
I recall definitely you using a metal zone with the JCM 800,
oh, yes.
which is borderline blasphemous.
Of course, any musicians, any of our musician friends who are listening or watching, I mean, you know exactly what that means. You know exactly what that's about. Putting a metal zone in front of anything can be,
but apparently using it as a preamp to like a power stage, apparently that works.
Well, I feel like when I bought the metal zone, I definitely cranked a lot of the settings. I did. Nowadays, I would start everything at 12 o'clock and then slowly work with it. But at the time, it seemed like, you want these sounds, so you crank them up like this. And I just kept. I found myself the more I played with other people, and definitely as I started playing in like a band configuration. First of all, that you can't max out gain on that pedal and have it sound good at all, or there's no clarity or anything like that. So I just kind of kept on sort of working the gain back. I kept turning it down lower and lower until I feel like when I gigged a lot, and that was still on my pedal board with Nones Low and stuff. The gain was not at like 0, but it was at maybe 0.5 or 1, something like that. That's where that ended up.
In reality, you could have probably just, if you would have traded that bad boy in for a overdrive or a tube screamer, it would have been a lot better.
Of course, of course. In hindsight,
and the whole idea is because like the JCM 800 is such a monster, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you couldn't get the tone out of it that you wanted without blowing everybody's ears off. So
exactly,
and that's where like the tube screamer would come into play or something like that.
Yep.
But you didn't have that, and what you had in your toolbox was a metal zone.
A metal zone.
And testament to your playing, you made a metal zone sound okay, right? I think that your tone back in that day was a lot different than it is now.
Oh, 100%.
Which is a good thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, I would be the first to say I was pretty green around the gills at that time. Like
trial
I had the
fire,
stuff,
right?
and it was trial by fire. Like playing gigs in front of people you don't know, putting out gear, and you think you have it dialed in, but as soon as it's mic'd up in a big room, it sounds different. How do you deal with that? There were a lot of things like that that all of us had to learn, just by doing. Real quick. Who are some of your favorite artists? We're talking about the past a little bit. I know a couple artists for me jump to mind when I think of you and your musical tastes. But who are some of your top 2, 3, 4?
Just bands that I liked.
Just bands that you like, and it doesn't have to be like who informed your playing or your choice of tone, but just artists who inspired you.
Like Corrosion of Conformity, Clutch for sure. Those two are pretty big. Probably Zach Wilde, like the Black Label size stuff did a lot more than I probably give it credit for anymore.
Okay.
But kind of a recent resurgence into listen to a bunch of it. I'm like, yeah, now I know why I kind of liked it back then a lot, right? So, but Black Sabbath for sure. I mean, that's like the start of it all. It still is some of the best stuff ever. But let's see, Metallica for sure.
Definitely.
And Alice in Chains probably is the last one.
Right.
Honestly, Jerry Cantrell's guitar playing is probably it led to me being, taught me a lot about playing guitar actually.
Definitely. I feel
Him
like-
in particular, and like
Yeah.
learning his stuff, right?
Yep.
So like covering Alice in Chains was, you know, it definitely helped my playing out a lot. So
Definitely. I mean, Jerry had he has a very particular voice in terms of, you know, his tone, his playing, the way he constructs riffs, and we've chatted about this in recent times too. You know, his vocals too. You know, I mean, he's if you talk to musicians, I'm sure they would say yes, of course, to a lot of this stuff. But you know, for the layperson, I guess, I mean, Jerry's, I would say, a fairly underrated musician in terms of his guitar playing, his songwriting, and his vocals. I mean, his harmonies with Lane were a huge part of the Alice in Chains sound. Not only Lane, of course. I mean, Lane was a big part of it, but yeah. Okay. So I feel like we need to wrap up part one of our conversation, so I can get to the next thing.
sure.
So this kind of brings us up to, I guess, 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What we were doing, the things we were playing. Some of the bands that we'd seen, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So next time we'll pick it up from, I guess, 2002. Some of the bands, or I guess, you know, the
I do remember seeing the start of the who's going to be your next person you just talked to.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the start of that whole thing. Especially when they were playing Howlers in the start.
Yes.
I think it was a little bit later on, but I can't remember exactly the dates. But I do remember seeing Boy Charlie play for sure.
Yep.
And in that era, but we'll probably have to talk about that next time. So
Yeah, absolutely. There are a ton more artists and numerous other bands that we will get into.
How's that for a segue?
That's a great segue.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll wrap it up for now. Thank you, Brandon.
You're welcome.
All right.